The price at the pump hit another record high today, a trend that's likely to continue for the foreseeable future. While the Biden administration scrambles to find a solution to the rising prices, it continues to oppose the most obvious and practical solution, tapping into America's vast resources. Instead, they decided to use America's financial pain to push green energy nonsense. Over the long term, friends, I'll give you my take on America's energy crisis in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. The one thing you know about gas prices is people who drive notice them. And that's also something that has a big impact on politics, on polls, because they don't like paying high prices. And under this Biden administration, where nothing is going according to plan, if you want what's best for the country, I mean, if you were seeking to make everybody miserable and seize authoritarian levels of power and then perhaps prepare for some kind of revolution from within, a kind of Maoist cultural revolution mixed with an authoritarian technocracy that yells science all the time, well, that's working out pretty well for them, I guess. But for those of us who are still just trying to pay bills and go on with our lives, things are looking rough out there. Here's the gas price today, $4.25. Yesterday it was $4.17. Keep in mind that yesterday was the all-time high, which means today is in fact the new all-time high price per gallon for gasoline in America, which just means that everything that's brought to you, everything you buy pretty much is more expensive. So you're going to be paying more. And, because of inflation, your dollars are worth less. That's not good. People who just want to go about their lives and try to build some financial stability and maybe even prosperity for themselves and their families going forward see this. And all the talking points and all the nonsense peddled by this White House just doesn't make up for it. You see what the prices are. You see what's coming out of your wallet or what the credit card receipt says, and you realize something's up. They have not been doing a good job as stewards of the economy. Notice when the stock market was going up, Biden was talking about creating jobs in a big economy, and he's a big hero, right? Well, now things are crappy. And is it his fault? No, of course not. But then that brings us to the next move, the next maneuver for these Democrats. Find someone else to blame. It can't be quasi-senile and increasingly decrepit and never particularly bright Joe Biden. Can't be his fault. He's the president. Can't be related to his decision-making because that would hurt Democrats' power. So who is responsible? Oh, that's right. Russia. It's Russia's fault, Biden says. Watch.
Go up. Can't do much right now. Russia's responsible.
Can't do much right now. Russia's responsible. Unbelievable this guy's president of the United States. It really is. But thanks, Democrats. Yeah, he did such a great job with COVID, too, right? I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm going to, he's all sort of squinting. I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm going to shut down the virus. Didn't do that either. This guy is atrocious at this job. But even Democrats think that Kamala might be even worse, which is amazing. I don't even know how that's possible, but that's what they're concerned with. So here we are. But let's compare Joe Biden to, his most recent his predecessor, the most recent occupant of the Oval Office before him. Here's the gas price during the pandemic, right in the middle of the pandemic, the last week of the Trump presidency versus the week before the Ukraine invasion. It was $2.28, then it went to $3.53. So wait, you're telling me that before there was even a Russian invasion of Ukraine, over a series of many months when Joe Biden is president, gas price goes up. That's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, and they'd like to believe that has nothing to do with just the posture of the administration, preventing additional oil exploration, all kinds of regulation, carbon capture programs, canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. None of that has anything to do with it. No, of course not. It's just, stuff that happens. It's fascinating as well to see that, inflation also started to really get going during Biden's time in office. You can look at it on a map, or on a graph, rather. It corresponds pretty directly with Joe Biden takes office. Inflation starts going up. Joe Biden has the Democrats spend $1.9 trillion without a single Republican vote. Inflation goes up. What a shock. Said nobody who's paying attention. But what is this really all about? You see, the Democrats are stuck in a place right now. They've got all this emotion going about the situation in Ukraine. And there's a lot of tough talk and pounding of chests about how we're going to stand for democracy. But wouldn't we be in a better place if we had much stronger domestic energy production currently and fully unleashed U.S. production so that the price of gas would be way down? Because Russia has 50% of its economy reliant on that. So that would mean they have a whole lot less cash reserves to fund their war machine, right? No. You see, what's even more important to Democrats than honestly stopping this war, if you were to ask them, because they say it's an existential threat, and that's climate change. These people are climate zealots. They're nuts. They either pretend to or actually believe that CO2 is a pollutant. CO2 is what plants need to survive. They breathe that in, so to speak, photosynthesis, but they take it in and expel oxygen as part of that process. Remember freshman year biology? They say that CO2, though, is going to destroy the planet unless we stop it. And that's why you have people like Biden's economic advisor, Brian Deese, saying absurd stuff like this.
Medium and long term, I think it's the path and the trajectory is clear. There is no amount of domestic production that we can do when we're dealing with a volatile global commodity where the price is set globally. There's no amount of domestic production we can do to reduce or eliminate our vulnerability as a country to that volatility. The only way to do that is to reduce the energy intensity of the economy overall, which means shifting to cleaner sources of energy.
Okay. So production of fossil fuel for the marketplace now that is needed, that's too long term, they say. That's unserious. It wouldn't even affect prices probably till, maybe the end of this year. But transitioning the entire economy to green energy, which would take 50 years, 80 years, who knows? That's a serious policy position to hold right now. These people have childlike thinking, driven by selfishness and emotion and vanity. Like Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, for example, who's saying, the real lesson here isn't we shouldn't have artificial barriers to the production of energy. We should meet all of our energy needs and then some beyond that, exporting as much as possible to the whole world. We should be the world's energy, fossil fuel superpower by far. And we were getting close to it, but then Democrats came in. Senator Murphy says, you know what we should do? Invest in clean energy. Oh, watch.
Let's just admit the insanity of a U.S. economy that continues to run on oil that is provided to us by dictators. The reality is, if we're not getting this oil from Russia, we're likely going to be importing more from another brutal dictator in Saudi Arabia, for instance, or we may have to go to Venezuela for oil. We should ultimately learn our lesson here and become energy independent and choose to invest in clean domestic energy so we never have to choose between one dictator versus another.
Clean domestic energy, yeah. Solar, windmills, that's going to say, well, let's set up some more windmills. That's a great idea. Set up some wind turbines out there, which, as we all know, are also pretty rough on the migratory fowl population. It's like a giant Cuisinart in the sky that turns them into clouds of feathers. It's pretty rough. Here's Jen Psaki saying that restarting Keystone wouldn't even do anything because she knows anything. Watch.
Is a restart of the Keystone XL construction completely off the table as long as Joe Biden is president?
Well, why don't you tell me what that would help address?
I'm asking you if it is an option. You guys say all options are on the table. Is restarting Keystone construction one of them?
If we're trying to bring about more supply, that does not address any problem.
It's supplied from Canada, a friendly ally, instead of Saudi Arabia.
That's already
or Iran.
we're already getting that oil, Peter. It's the pipeline is just a delivery mechanism. It is not an oil field, so it does not provide more supply into the system. It does not address.
Is it possible that Joe Biden will ever say, you guys can go ahead with construction of Keystone XL?
There's no plans for that, and it would not address any of the problems we're having currently.
People in charge are just unserious, vain, foolish, and destructive. Biden regime. How devastated would you be if you found out that a criminal stole all the equity in your home? This crime's happening all over the U.S. There's one company standing between you and these thieves. Home title lock. The FBI says home title fraud is one of the fastest growing crimes, which is why you need to go to HomeTitleLock.com, America's leader in home title protection. Here's the problem. The deed to your home is the only document that proves you own it, and the deeds to all our homes are online now. In minutes, a criminal can forge your name off the deed to your home and refile as the new owner. The crime can cause you to spend a fortune in legal fees when thieves take out loans in your name. You often don't find out about this until it's too late. You have big bills that you didn't run up, can even lead to eviction from your own home. It's a huge problem out there. Common identity theft services, they actually don't protect you from this crime. A lot of people don't know that. HomeTitleLock.com gives you peace of mind that your home's deed is in fact protected. So this is a service that you need to protect the single most valuable asset you own. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com, and you'll get a great idea of just how you can protect your home's title. Just go to this website, HomeTitleLock.com. President Biden has a convenient new excuse for just about everything that goes wrong. High gas prices, Putin's fault. Grocery bills getting high, blame Putin. Inflation out of control, that's Putin too. But are Americans buying it? Not according to a new poll from the Wall Street Journal. The newspaper writes, the new survey showed that 57% of voters remained unhappy with Mr. Biden's job performance, despite favorable marks for the president's response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a recent State of the Union speech. Just 42% said they approved of Mr. Biden's performance in office, which was virtually unchanged from the previous Journal poll in mid-November. Joining me now is the CEO of American Majority, Ned Ryan. Ned, always good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Buck.
Let's just start with what they're going to say about all this, because, we're not far from possible accountability for all the insanely bad decisions Democrats have made since they took power a year ago. Here is, for example, Joe Biden just last week, Ned, claiming that it is Democrats who have brought our economy back. Play that one.
Let's be clear. When America's recovery was flat on its back and the economy was flat on its back, it was the Democrats, without a single Republican vote, that brought us back.
I mean, what is even? The Democrats basically screamed like banshees to shut down the country and to shut down again after the initial 2 weeks of shutdown of the Trump administration. And now they're acting like they're the heroes of the economy because eventually they kind of sort of let people go back to their lives. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing that they're gaslighting so hard to persuade the American people what just took place over the last 2 years really didn't happen. We had nothing to do with it. When in fact they were part and parcel to making sure all these lockdowns took place and our economy was destroyed. The thing that's pretty interesting to me, Buck, again, liars lie, and Joe Biden is the chief liar. But the bill that he's referring to was the $1.9 trillion bill that was passed without a Republican vote back at the beginning of 2021 that actually put us into an inflationary spiral that has led to some of the things that we're experiencing today. It did not recover our economy, actually put us into an inflationary cycle. And between their terrible monetary spending policies and their terrible energy policies, here we are today with Americans paying $5-6 for a gallon of gas, inflation at 7.9%, the highest has been in 40 years. So, no, you've not, in fact, brought back the economy. Your policies continue to destroy and make comeback that much harder.
I mean, Ned, it seems to me that the decisions were made here by Democrats. I mean, let's talk about what Biden's saying here. And when he took office, the Democrats spent $1.9 trillion, straight party line vote, not a single Republican vote for it, to extend the emergency benefits and other things from the COVID era. Well, now we're finding out that we're basically losing a month of wages to inflation. Never mind the months you spend working for the tax man. You actually lose an entire month to inflation. It seems like math is having its revenge here on the Democrats' policies.
It's hard to look at these people and think that they're serious, Buck, because it's pretty obvious what's brought about the inflation, this outrageous government spending, the printing of money, this fiat money. You put more money into the system, you cheapen its value. Cost of things have gone up because of the gas prices, not only gas itself, but food, anything else that needs to be transported. And they're acting like that the average day American citizen is not paying attention to their policy choices. The thing that's, again, staggering to me, as you alluded to in the opening, that they're blaming everything on Putin. Well, this is all Putin's fault. Russia's caused this. The Ukrainian invasion has caused this. No, the price of crude oil had actually doubled well before Russia invaded Ukraine. Natural gas had gone up 74% before before Russia invaded Ukraine. These were all based off Biden and the Democrats' policy decisions that have actually caused these things to take place. And the American people are looking at this, and you alluded to these poll numbers that have been stagnant. I think you got a 4-point bump out of the State of the Union that's disappeared in less than 2 weeks. But you look at his numbers on the economy and inflation, he's still at 31% on inflation and economy, and I think 38% on some of these other key issues. The American people aren't buying these lies. And at some point, like you alluded to again, the Democrats are going to have to face the music, and that's coming in November, because I think at that point, I don't see an end to this anytime soon, Buck. This is, again, a trend. The trajectory is not changing because they are committed to it. I tell people all the time, their energy policy, their spending policy, all of these things, these are not bugs. These are features of the modern day Democratic Party that has been consumed by the far left progressive.
Here, by the way, we have a moment where the Democrats, it seems, are just going to say things that I have to ask you. I mean, you're a guy who understands political messaging very well, Ned. Pelosi said recently that government spending doesn't cause, rather, government spending will lower the debt. And she did it like she was explaining this to a bunch of kindergartners, right? She's like, government spending will lower the debt and is not inflationary. At some point, this really is 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, is that, does Pelosi think that this will work with her base so it doesn't matter? I mean, who is she speaking to with that? Government spending will lower the debt. She actually says this out loud.
Well, they clearly think we're all idiots, Buck. They clearly think their base are idiots, that they will actually believe those lies. But again, it seems like they've taken the advice of repeat a big enough lie often enough and people will believe it, in hopes that nobody will notice the facts are divergent from what they're actually saying. But when you look, and I think one of the key things that people should be looking at, Buck, with everything that's taking place, you can look at Democrats, you can look at Republicans as they parse it out, harden up on either side. Look at the independent. Even in some of these polls where Biden got a little bump out of the State of the Union, he's still in the low 30s with independents, even in the 20s with independents, depending on the poll. The independents are certainly not buying Biden or the Democrat agenda. And that's obviously a huge key factor in modern day American politics that I think is going to be devastating for them this fall moving forward.
We know that a part of the messaging, Ned, is certainly going to be some version of Donald Trump is going to come back and steal your children in the middle of the night, the January 6th insurrection, white nationalist coup, there's some crazy stuff. I mean, here's Pelosi saying that if Republicans win in the midterms, they will nullify elections. This is what she says. Watch.
We have to show the public the relationship between democracy and their kitchen table concerns. If the other side has its way in suppressing the vote, and nullifying elections, what does that mean? It means big, dark money dominates. So at the kitchen table, people will not have the confidence that they can have lower drug prices or higher minimum wage or better public education for their children or safer neighborhoods free of gun violence, because that big, dark money, which would prevail if the Republicans have their way in suppressing the vote and in nullifying elections.
I mean, seriously, what the hell is she talking about? Like that was just wow.
I have to tell you, even though I've been in politics a long time, Buck, I still am stunned that people say these things. Money. Oh, I don't know. How about Mark Zuckerberg's $419 million that he spent in the 2020 elections? Democrats love them some dark money, soft money. But, the amazing thing about them, too, is they always project onto Republicans what they're actually doing in trying to nullify elections and manipulate electoral results. All Republicans are doing, and this is what is irritating and frustrating and making Pelosi and the others so angry, is that you're seeing a lot of state legislatures across the country, they're outlawing Zuckerberg. They're actually passing legislation to require voter ID. They're actually doing things to secure and make our elections free and fair so that the American people can actually have confidence in our elections. But Democrats love the soft money. They love to be able to have manipulate the elections. And in regards to democracy, this is the other staggering part to me, Buck. When Democrats talk about democracy, it's whatever they say it is. And democracy for them is we're in control perpetually, and we have no dissidents. We have nobody disagreeing with what we have to say, one party rule. That's the Democrats' definition of democracy.
Ned Ryan, My friend, always wise, always worthwhile. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Buck.
A shocking, never-before-seen video has been released showing the final moments of a Los Angeles DUI suspect who died after being pinned to the ground face down by California Highway Patrol as they tried to take a blood sample. The victim, Edward Bronstein, can be heard screaming, "I can't breathe," repeatedly until he died in police custody. Warning, the video is very disturbing and it is hard to watch.
You're bringing the fight to this, not us.
I'm not fighting it at all.
Then have a seat and provide your arm. This is your last opportunity. Otherwise, you're going face down on the mat, and we're going to keep on going.
I'll do it, I'll do it, I promise you will. I'll do it, I'll do it. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Just stop yelling.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't.
This horrifying incident took place 2 months before the murder of George Floyd, a case that shocked the nation and sent protesters flooding the streets to riot and destroy parts of major U.S. cities. But will there be outrage over the murder of Edward Bronstein? Will there be riots? Will there be justified lawlessness? A national conversation? Let's bring in Deputy Editor of Real Clear Investigations, Ben Weingarten, to talk to us about this. Ben, thanks for staying with us.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
I think it's unfortunately very likely here that we'll see that the first inclination of the Democrat-aligned left-wing media in this country when there's an incident of police violence isn't even necessarily to gauge the use of force in and of itself, but to figure out, well, is the victim an African American? If the answer is no, the police violence seems markedly less important to them.
I think you're right. And it's really sick and cynical. And we should say this is a harrowing video. So set aside the identity politics, set aside the merits or demerits of the cops' training and what the policies and practices are in California. It's a horrible video to watch. Unfortunately, I think the first inclination of our benighted corporate media is to always go towards, is this story useful to our agenda or not? And when it comes to acts of police violence on suspects, that usually goes right to identity politics. And you see this with all manner of stories. When the media is very open and transparent about who a victim or an aggressor is versus when they hide it. And you see it start to trickle out in social media, and then you wait 12 hours, and then you suddenly find out the identities of those involved. And that's sad, because what the media ought to do, if we had a media that actually cared about imparting knowledge and information about events that you can make decisions for yourself, is that they ought to report without fear or favor. But so often, instead, people use their privileged positions in the media to advance agendas useful to them, or like we just talked about in that last segment, to suppress stories that cut against narratives that would hurt them. And that's what I think we'll probably see here. I suspect, I hope, we're not going to see damage and devastation wrought across the country. And it's really remarkable to step back and look at it almost 2 years later, the anti-cultural revolution that did sweep the country when the media felt the identity politics were ripe to take advantage of and exploit a horrible situation.
And you mentioned this, the George Floyd protests triggered riots in America not seen in decades. Some would say the only riots that were similar in scale would have been after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. back in 1968. So going back quite a ways, and obviously to a very a tragic incident with the assassination of MLK Jr. And I do, though, as I look at this, the situation of the individual who died in custody of the California Highway Patrol, I have to say there was this immediate rush right when the George Floyd incident happened, not only from the media, but corporations all across the country, to suggest that this was representative of law enforcement in terms of racism, but wasn't really about the policy or the procedure that was used per se. It was really the cops are racist, so we all have to go now and march in the streets about racist cops. This video, as horrific as it is, shows that there are other instances of individuals who suffer from the tactics used here of police doing a immobilization hold of some kind, putting knee on the neck, knee on the back, shoulder blades, etc., and that this is something that was happening elsewhere in the country. It just feels like, Ben, if we had talked about police brutality and the specifics of the incident with George Floyd with regard to police tactics, instead of just acting like that was representative of racism all throughout law enforcement, maybe we would have gotten sooner to policies that would prevent this sort of thing from happening instead of having the country go through riots for months.
Yeah, absolutely. And inflicting in the process tons of damage, between $1 and $2 billion of damage, it's estimated, on cities across the country, leading to the pulling back of police forces and defunding of police forces, which has generated, at the very minimum, coincided, and I think it's pretty clear, caused a massive uptick in violent crime, threatening, terrorizing law-abiding citizens in cities and suburbs across the country. So to your point, of course, they didn't want to grapple with the merits of what happened, even though it would have been better for the country. Instead, the first inclination was to jump to race. And by the way, when it comes to the Floyd incident, there's no evidence that this was a racially driven incident of the police forces. And the other aspect, if we're going to talk about the politics of these things, which I find really beyond distasteful in the first place, but the media forces it there, is what about the fact that these are often police forces in blue cities or blue states, other blue jurisdictions? So if police are systemically racist and it's happening in blue locales across the country, then is it that the Democratic Party is systemically racist? I mean, of course, they don't want to grapple with the implications of the rhetoric that they spew, but they ought to be asked about that.
I think that's true. And you see that while they talk about police reform in the context of criminal justice reform, that's a phrase that sounds good to people, Ben. But criminal justice reform, as it has been practiced by progressive prosecutors in cities across the country and law enforcement agencies now in those blue jurisdictions, has resulted in a whole lot more crime, more murders, more assaults, more rapes. And you have to wonder, at what point does the left recognize that many of their narratives around these issues are just more destructive?
Yeah, fomenting injustice in the name of social justice. And ironically, it's the most woke cohort among leftists, when you look at polling that's been done on this, is white liberal elites. That's who pushes this. White liberal elites who don't have to deal with the consequences of these policies ultimately. It's the people living in the most dangerous areas who have to deal with the consequences of these Soros DAs across the country. So it's disastrous all around. The American people can make Democrats pay at the ballot box, but we're talking about decades of punishment being inflicted on blue locales across the country because of these very dangerous ideologies that then manifest themselves in even more dangerous policies.
Ben, thanks again for your time today. Good to see you.
Buck, it's my pleasure. You too.
A lot of companies promise that your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity application tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure is using proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communication is based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue now. You know this. Without real security, people can read your emails, messages, even your bank information. Secure will never mine your data and never asks for your phone number. You can send emails to your doctor, banker, lawyer, or anyone else with total confidence that you're not being spied on by your internet provider or big tech. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. It costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com. That's SEKUR.com. Secure.com. Take back your privacy today. That's secure.com. Make sure you use promo code BUCK for 25% off. A public school in San Antonio, Texas is under fire today for a sick anti-racism lesson that segregated 10-year-olds by hair color. According to the parents of one student at Leon Springs Elementary, teachers told students that the children in the fair-haired group were not as intelligent That group was purposely given a game with pieces missing so they could not play. Later, they were made to clean up after the other children. The lesson also included a screening of the Spike Lee documentary, 4 Little Girls, about the 1963 Alabama church bombing. The documentary reportedly includes graphic autopsy photos of the dead children. This is what teachers are, in this one school at least, showing 10-year-olds. They also tell you somehow there's no critical race theory in public schools anywhere in America. That's what the left says, but we know that's not true. So what's going on here? Joining me now is the author of They're Not Listening and founder of the 1776 Project PAC, Ryan Grodusky. Ryan, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Buck.
This is, there's these cases that come up. They keep saying when we talk about critical race theory in schools and what can and cannot be taught, they say there is no critical race theory, as you well know. I know you do a lot of work on this issue, Ryan. But then an incident like this comes up. How much of this kind of stuff is actually going on across the country? I mean, people hear this when they say, this is like lunacy that they're inflicting upon children.
So what I like to say is that critical race theory is not being taught in school, it's being practiced in school, which is a separate thing. This is happening all over the entire country. I mean, and it's most pronounced oftentimes in red counties and red states and red districts. I was just in Collin County, Texas, where the kids were told what implicit biases, where they are told what white people think is things like Mexicans love tacos and Asians are bad drivers and blacks are lazy. I was at another school district in Fredericksburg, Maryland, a red district in a blue state, and the white third graders had to walk up to all the black third graders and apologize. In Atlanta, Georgia, a black mother asked the black principal to put her black child in a specific classroom, and the black principal said, no, sorry, this is a classroom for only white students because we want black kids only with other blacks to completely immerse themselves in their blackness. This is happening all over, in the reddest of red states, in the bluest of blue states. It is, and there's no silver bullet for it. It's going to take a lot of work to undo all this.
There, in that case I started out with here in the segment, Ryan, where they were segregating kids by hair color, and some of them had to clean up after the other kids and were suffering this mistreatment. The school district statement on the 5th grade lesson said the following: the activity and video in question were part of a larger 5th grade project-based lesson around the iniquity of segregation. While the campus did receive positive feedback from several parents, district and campus administration recognized the parents' concerns and agree the activity and video are not age appropriate and will not be used again. So they're kind of saying, all right, maybe this one went a little far, but overall we thought it was a pretty good lesson. I mean, it's remarkable, this school district.
So I mean, I'm not surprised that they're continuing this, but this has been going on for actually a very, very, very long time where they have this program. But this is the least of it. I mean, privilege walks are happening in every state, like I said, and it's how they are incorporating now critical race theory into the hard sciences, into science, into math class, and all the rest of it. It's not appropriate for any age when we do that.
By the way, there's also this. Speaking of the teaching in school situation and possible efforts you mentioned, it's going to take a lot of time. There's no silver bullet to undo some of the left-wing kind of Marxist indoctrination that's happening of little kids. Here you have the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida getting a lot of attention. It's really the parental rights bill, but the media just dubbed it the Don't Say Gay bill because that was the talking point, really the line of attack used by LGBTQ activists against it. Ron DeSantis, Ryan, not standing around for this one quietly. Here's how he responded to a reporter asking about this.
Amendment 7, parental rights and education, what critics call the Don't Say Gay bill, is on the Senate floor.
Does it say that in the bill?
Know that you support.
Does it say that in the bill? I'm asking you to tell me what's in the bill because you are pushing false narratives. It doesn't matter what critics say.
Hold on. It says it bans classroom instruction on sexual identity and gender orientation.
For who? For grades pre-K through 3. So 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and the idea that you wouldn't be honest about that and tell people what it actually says, it's why people don't trust people like you, because you peddle false narratives. And so we disabuse you of those narratives. And we're going to make sure that parents are able to send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into their school curriculum.
Now, put aside for a moment, I mean, I think Ron DeSantis is great in the way that he deals with the fake news. But on the issue of this bill, Ryan, my understanding is that when they've actually started to see some polling on this, now that people know what's in it and what's not, a pretty solid majority of the American people are like, no, you shouldn't be teaching 5, 6, and 7-year-olds this stuff in public school curriculum. What's the truth of it?
Polling is actually really mixed on the issue. I've seen polls that have it overwhelmingly opposed to this bill, and then polls showing overwhelmingly supportive of the bill. I think it's just going to take time to actually needle it out, and once people realize what's actually in the bill, they won't be so opposed to it. I think that the most important thing that people could learn from DeSantis is that you have to fight for public education. You know, for decades, Republicans have sat there and said, we should just try as hard as we can to move kids out of public education to private education. That is not the answer. Private schools, in many cases, are actually far more woke, far more liberal, and far more progressive, with no government oversight and little parental involvement as possible. So I say kudos to him, and kudos to anyone trying to actually work to reform public education, because that's where the fight is. That's where 85% of American children go to, is public education.
Should there be bills passed in as many states as there are Republican majority legislatures leading into this midterm election that force Democrats to take positions on things like instruction in gender identity for 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, that take them to force them to take a position on whether there can be racial indoctrination training for third graders or whatever the case may be? Do you think that that's smart politics?
I think the smart politics right now would be the school transparency bills that are being pushed in every state. So basically, teachers would have to put online their entire curriculum, public and private school teachers. That's really, I think, the biggest advancement parents can get. The reason parents became active in the education fight leading up to the Virginia election in 2021 was because their kids were at home. They were learning at home, and the parents got to see very vividly what their kids were learning, and they were horrified. I think that transparency needs to be available to all parents, public and private school, and it would be ridiculous not to accept that. I think that would be a line that everyone would sit there and support overwhelmingly, and that would be a very tough fight for Democrats to sit there and back away from.
Ryan Gordusky, good to see you, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're announcing new guidelines for every American to follow over the next 15 days. As we combat the virus, each and every one of us has a critical role to play.
Today marks the 2-year anniversary of the infamous quote heard around the world, 15 days to slow the spread. Remember that one? 2 years, folks, full of lockdowns, mandates for vaccines and masks. And although we may be getting closer to ending this chapter of the pandemic, our next guest says we will be forever changed. And he's certainly right about that. Here to discuss, New York Post columnist David Marcus. David, good to see you.
How you doing, Buck?
Let's start with this one. I forgot until I watched this one today, and I played it on my radio show, that it wasn't even 15 days to slow the spread, and then we'll just batten down the hatches. I mean, the initial promise was like 15 days to slow the spread, and then we're basically like, we're good. Like, just give us 15 days to set it up. I mean, here's 2 years ago today, we all remember her, Dr. Deborah Birx. Watch this one.
We're asking that same sense of community to come together and stand up against this virus. And if everybody in America does what we ask for over the next 15 days, we will see a dramatic difference, and we won't have to worry about the ventilators, and we won't have to worry about the ICU beds, because we won't have our elderly and our people at the greatest risk having to be hospitalized.
I mean, that just wasn't even a little bit accurate, right? I mean, that was like, that was crazy, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think there were times when Birx went a little off the rails, but I think in general she was much more reasonable than Fauci was, and especially than Fauci eventually became. Even Fauci was fairly reasonable for a little while, and really got vastly worse after the Biden administration. But yeah, look, it's nobody saw this coming. I remember interviewing people, New York politicians, saying, "How long do you think this is going to last?" They thought 30 days. I remember being on Tucker in May of 2020 and saying to Tucker Carlson, "When does this end? Can you imagine this going to September?" And that seemed crazy to me. In May of 2020, the idea that anything was going to last until September seemed insane. And yeah, here we are 2 years later.
You're right. There's a lot of fog of war stuff. And I remember early on, too, they went to a few people who were saying, well, we should pretty much lock down until vaccination. And this is going to take 18 months to 2 years to get through. And everybody was like, well, that's completely insane. When really what we saw was that was what the public health establishment's plan turned out to be very, very quickly. But for me, because I was, all right, 15 days. I went along with the 15 days. I thought, that doesn't seem that crazy to me. The 15 days was kind of sold on an absurd lie, which was that we'll just do this and then we'll be ready to handle everything. Then it just kept getting extended and extended. It felt like from the very beginning, they weren't shooting straight with the American public.
Yeah, there's something really telling now that I think about it in that clip that you just played from Burks, because what does she say that we're not going to have to do? She says after the 15 days, we're not going to have the ICU bed problem. But who does she talk about? She talks about the elderly, right? Because she knew that's where the focus really should have been all along. But this is way before we were talking about whether kids should go to school. And she knew, everybody knew that the infection fatality rate was really low for anybody who wasn't elderly. So that was a kind of straight talk that you just played that really got shut up pretty quick.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to go back and look at some of the early discussions. And I remember when, I know Governor Cuomo said at one point, I think Nancy Pelosi also repeated this, that we needed to mobilize the Defense Production Act for 1 million ventilators, 1 million ICU ventilators that would have to be staffed by ICU nurses, in addition to existing ventilator capacity across the country, to give everyone a sense of how completely wrong and off the mark the experts were, who then told us to Lysol our groceries, and then for the next 2 years until today, we're just full of bad ideas. I mean, it was essentially one bad idea after another.
It's incredible. Every once in a while, I just tweet the words, "Don't touch your face," right? Just so people remember that was real, that there actually were adult people on television. I just did it, right? Saying, "Don't touch your face," which actually probably made people touch their faces a whole lot more, because the moment you say it, you want to do it. And then, of course, in order to wear a mask, what do you have to do? So, I mean, yeah, the whole thing, when you go back and look through it slowly, it's so incredibly absurd. But listen, Buck, that's not going to stop the Democrats from pretending that they had this right all along. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but there's reporting today that our old friend Andrew Cuomo's, may try to run for governor again. He's already running political ads, and believe me, he's not going to run apologizing for how he handled COVID. He's going to say it was great.
It's astonishing that this is where we are for all this. By the way, a lot of lessons still haven't been learned by some of the people in power. Yesterday, the Senate passed a resolution that would undo the extension of now the 13-month federal regulation requiring, it's got to be, isn't it longer than that? Well, anyway, requiring masks on planes, trains, subways. I just rode the Amtrak last weekend, and sure enough, one of the conductors, "Excuse me, sir, can you pull the mask up above your nose?" And I just sort of hold up my coffee cup like, no, I'm allowed to spread the virus now because I have a coffee in my hand. Those are the rules that you idiots have come up with. 57-40 vote on this federal mask mandate drew a veto threat from President Biden. So 8 Democrats, I mean, we can't get bipartisan anything these days other than daylight savings time, apparently. We can't get bipartisan anything. Biden would veto this? I mean, these people are lunatics.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened on Amtrak. I take the New York subway a lot, and I can happily report that the masks are starting to come off. Even just today, I noticed a big difference from a week or two ago. Technically, you're supposed to wear, but nobody's enforcing it. And ultimately, that's what the thing on planes will come down to, is I don't think the industry wants it, right? Not so much because people won't buy tickets, but airline attendants don't want to be the mask police any more than restaurateurs want to be the vaccine police. So hopefully you'll get pressure from the industry saying, look, more people are getting hurt in fist fights up in the air having to do with masks than are getting hurt not wearing a mask on a plane. Let's hope, but maybe that's too reasonable for this.
Look, I get it. All these unruly passengers. I mean, because some of the mask policing from airline attendants really is kind of snarky and unnecessarily aggressive and completely arbitrary. And when someone tells me to mask up, I've felt this way for a long time. I actually have to suppress feelings of I want to do violence now. Like, I actually want to throw things at people who say mask up, because I'm like, you are a totalitarian moron, and because of people like you, the country has gone through this theater for 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And you know, we have to hope that a lot of people are going to come to the conclusion that we made a lot of mistakes. I think there's a third to a half of the country who really aren't there yet. I like this idea of a 9/11 style commission to look at, you know, the mistakes that we made over COVID. You know, I understand it'll be mired down in politics like everything is, but I do think we need accountability. I do think we need an accounting of this. Otherwise, I'm already seeing the Democrats take victory laps and say we're the ones who beat COVID. So, you know.
It's amazing. David, it's good to be in the trench with you on this one, my friend. Thanks for hanging out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Buck.